So I don't usually talk baseball. This is not a baseball YouTube channel. It's mostly just football. I do talk basketball occasionally, but not so much this year. Usually just football. I'm willing to wade in on this Barry Bonds conversation though, because it's gotten so big and it's been something that we've talked about seemingly every year for the past 5 years. Barry Bonds now no longer eligible for the Baseball Hall of Fame, at least in the modern voting system. He can go to like a seniors committee that will be made up of different people from the current voters for the modern player list, but at the same time, like, you have to really go to that extent to get Barry Bonds into the Hall of Fame. I think he'll get in eventually under the seniors committee, just because I think there's some more former players in there who actually not take pity on, but recognize the situation he was in, recognize that he was in an era where most of the top players were taking steroids. And if you weren't taking steroids, you were at a disadvantage in baseball at the time. Now, baseball has obviously turned completely against steroids, but at the time in that era, they were not seen as acceptable, but they were very common. Barry Bonds is obviously the all-time home runs leader, who's now not in the Hall of Fame. And there's a crazy stat that a Twitter user, Kendall Baker, put out there today. I'm looking at it right now. David Ortiz, who was elected into the Hall of Fame, his on-base percentage for his career is 38%. Barry Bonds' career on-base percentage, if you turn all 762 of his home runs into outs, is 38.4%. So still higher than David Ortiz's career on-base percentage if you took away 762 home runs. And now we're looking at a situation in the Hall of Fame where you don't have no all-time hits leader, Pete Rose is not in, no all-time home runs leader, and Barry Bonds, and the all-time Cy Young Award winner leader, Roger Clemens, is not in. I think he won 7, I want to say. So you're in a situation now where you're three of the biggest players in the sport's history are not in the Hall of Fame. There's other players in there who also fall into the steroid conversations, like a Sammy Sosa. You know, it's not just these three guys. Although Rose is not I think tied to really steroids so much as he did some other stuff in his career. You know, so someone like Curt Schilling, who's not, again, not tied to the steroids conversation, but is more of just viewed as a sort of like a pariah in a sense because of some of the things he said in his post-career, not just in terms of politically, but in terms of other things as well. Things he's come out and said against journalism and journalists who are the ones who vote for the Hall of Fame, which is another conversation we could have about who deserves to vote for the Hall of Fame. Should it be former players and coaches? You know, should it be people who actually play the sport? Should it be the people who cover the sport for a living, which is what it is right now? It's journalists. And should it be about specifically your on-field performance, not your post-career comments or something like that, your social life or what you say in the public sphere? Because that's obviously with keeping Curt Schilling out, and with Barry Bonds and those guys, obviously more on the steroid front. And it's just difficult to process because you have a Hall of Fame. The home run leader is not in. The hits leader is not in. And it's just at some point you have to sit back and think, like, what is this supposed to be? Is this supposed to be a Hall of Fame for the best performances of all time, or is it supposed to be like a morality thing? Like, if it's supposed to be like a morality thing, then it's really not a Hall of Fame. You know, you can't really pitch it as the Baseball Hall of Fame because some of the best players of all time aren't in it. And it just, like, obviously there's a line to draw. Like, if you cross a certain line in terms of crimes committed or something like that, then yeah, you should be omitted from the Hall of Fame ballot. You should not be allowed in. Someone like Darren Sharper in the NFL, I won't go into the depths of his crimes, but you can look them up for yourself. He's not going to appear on a Hall of Fame ballot anytime soon, despite the fact that he might have had a Hall of Fame career, because the crimes committed are so bad that you're not allowed to come back from that in terms of the Hall of Fame voting. And you'll probably spend most of your life in jail. I'm not suggesting you should allow people like that into the Hall of Fame, but I am saying something like this with the steroids or the post-career comments and stuff like that. You have to really consider, if you're an organization or a writer, what you're doing here. You're not assigned to police morality. You are assigned to elect the best baseball players into the Hall of Fame. And if you're holding the Hall of Fame such a high standard that you don't want to put Curt Schilling, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, these kind of guys in, I think you're doing a disservice more than you're actually helping it, despite the fact that you might be trying to keep it like this holy and pure thing by not putting these guys in. It really takes away from it anyways and causes more controversy. It's one of the reasons why the popularity of baseball is kind of dwindling to some extent, in the United States is there's so many of these controversial issues that always linger around baseball. Whether it's things like unwritten rules or people saying how the game should be played, there should be less flair in the game, and all kind of stuff. There's always so many of these controversies around baseball. Not that other sports don't have these issues, but it just feels like baseball has all these petty problems going around behind the scenes. And that's kind of why I have trouble getting into the sport full time, because there's so much stuff I don't have time to deal with. I don't want to have to deal with that kind of stuff on a day-to-day basis. So just giving you a little bit of my insight into that. I think Barry Bonds is someone that I would put in the Hall of Fame, and frankly, I would say, the steroid era happened. Baseball needs to accept that. And if we were truly making a Hall of Fame, the best players of all time, then someone like a Barry Bonds should be included. Someone like Roger Clemens should be included in the Hall of Fame. And if you want to have debates about guys like Pete Rose and other things down the line, we could do that. But at least in this sense, Barry Bonds not getting in, despite all these years of eligibility, really shows a somewhat archaic mindset by the people voting for the Baseball Hall of Fame.